Hello and welcome to the BucketLister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the BucketLister Podcast. I'm back today chatting with Jake, one of our guides, and we thought it would be a really good idea today to discuss hydration on your trip and how to stay hydrated. So good morning, Jake.
Morning, Keith. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm currently looking over the skyline of Santiago in Chile. How's your day?
Yeah, not as good. I'm definitely jealous of that. I think the closest I'm going to get to traveling is looking at some of the Nepalese stuff that I brought back on my desk. That's about as close as I'm going to get today.
Yeah, we've got the long trip back tomorrow from Santiago with the group. So we were in Easter Island yesterday, flew back from Easter Island, and then a day in Santiago today before we head back to the UK tomorrow. So a couple of long days traveling, but I am going to do a podcast on Chile in Easter Island because it has been an amazing trip. But on to today's podcast anyway. We're going to chat about hydration and how to stay hydrated on your trek. So do you want to give us a few ideas of what you're up to?
Yeah, I think so. Some of the trips that I've got coming up this year, things like Everest Base Camp, Mount Toubkal, things like that. Lots of people focus on staying physically fit, which is obviously really important. Make sure they've got all the right kit, and obviously those are all really important bits. But what a lot of people don't factor in is actually when it's kind of looking after yourself day to day on those trips, and because they're multi-day, making sure that you're in a good position to be as rested and as recovered the following day is just as important as making sure you're physically fit to do those in the run up as well. So hydration is probably one of those things that the people who have been on my trips, I'm sure they can hear certain things that I say going around in their heads even today, because I tend to be quite on it with making sure that people stay hydrated. When you're in hot countries, obviously you've got heat stroke and sunstroke and things like that. But even in colder countries and the ones at higher altitude, a lot of the problems that you can run into will start from you being dehydrated.
Yeah, I think being hydrated is super important, and especially altitude. And obviously many of the signs of altitude sickness are also the same signs as dehydration. So it's very, people think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm dehydrated, I've got altitude sickness, but actually the chances are that they just haven't drank enough and they've...
Yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the most common things. And obviously as we're walking, I'm chatting to people, keeping an eye on people. It's when people start coming to me and saying, I've got a headache, I'm feeling a little bit sick. Obviously the first thing they're going to jump to is altitude sickness or, signs of acclimatization sickness. But we take plenty of acclimatization days and we go at a steady pace and things like that. So people coming down with altitude sickness isn't super common on our trips and things like that. So the most common thing is that they're dehydrated, and they're always surprised if they come up to me and they go, I think I've got altitude sickness. And I go, how much have you drunk? And then they go, oh, well, like half a litre in the last day. So, okay, well, that's probably going to be why. The first thing I'll do is tell someone to take on some fluids, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think the important thing is how people don't realize actually physically how much water they need to drink a day when they are trekking at altitude.
Well, you don't always realize. I mean, yes, it is physical and you are walking for a long period of time, but because we go, especially at altitude, we go at quite a steady pace. You don't always realize how much you're actually working. I mean, towards the end, it obviously does get tougher, but you're on your feet for a good chunk of the day. So you are going to be, getting through those liquids. So it is really important.
So what would you say is like the minimum that somebody needs to drink a day when they're out trekking at altitude?
I usually go 4 liters, so I tend to always recommend to people 4 liters. That might sound really unachievable for those of you sat at home, and if you work in an office or anything like that, then the idea of trying to drink 4 liters a day is it sounds like quite a lot. But if you're just sipping away little and often as you're hiking, then that is more than achievable. I tend not to include teas and coffees in that. Obviously, when you get in Nepal or Kilimanjaro, when you get into those camps, the guys are really good at getting the kettle on, and you can have teas and coffees and things like that. But I tend to just recommend to people 4 liters of just water, and then on top of that, your teas and your coffees and your hot chocolates.
Yeah, well, you've got to. Well, I mean, hot chocolate's not too bad, but you've got to remember tea and coffee is a diuretic, isn't it? So that's having the negative impact on. I mean, like for my guys, whenever I'm on a trip, I'll always say to people to try and get a liter inside them before they've even started the trek of the day. So from the moment you wake up, you've then got your time for breakfast, you've then got your time for sorting yourself out, and then you leave for the start of the trek for the day. If you can have a liter inside you before you even start that process, you're already onto a good start of the day at that point.
Well, especially because, you would have had that time sleeping, and usually, especially on those trips that we're talking about, you do tend to go to bed a little bit earlier. You're going to have a long time where you're breathing in that thin air, and that's going to dehydrate you overnight. So waking up and replacing those fluids is going to be a really good idea. Yeah, hydrating straight away.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And obviously, it's different on some trips, isn't it? Because some trips you have access. You have easier access to water than on other trips, basically.
Yeah, some of them it's going to be readily available all the time. Others you might have to kind of carry a little bit more with you, but you're never going to have to carry, multiple days worth of water with you. So I suppose that comes down to some of the ways that you would want to carry that water. I like to go for a combination of a couple of different ways. So the water to go bottles that we've spoken about in some of the other episodes are really useful. The fact that they've got the filter built into them means that, first of all, if you're filling up from a tap or anywhere else en route, you don't need to worry about that water. You can drink that straight through the bottle, and it's going to be nice and safe for you to drink. So having a couple of those is really good. And then I also recommend something like a Camelback to people as well. Having that pipe just near you, for me anyway, means that I drink much more regularly, sort of slowly and regularly. Sometimes getting a water bottle out of your bag can be a bit of a faff, so people are less likely to drink.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, the Camelback, because I completely get what you're saying, but I've seen it so many times where when people are using their Camelback, they use it to kind of have a sip here and have a sip there, and they don't actually realize how little water they are taking in. And when you get into camp in the evening and they tell you they've got a headache and they pull their Camelback out and they've only drank a quarter of it, and they've said, well, I've been drinking all day. But you're like, well, you have been, but you've been sipping all day. Like when you've got a physical, like a Nalgene bottle or a water to go bottle in your hand, you physically know I've drank all that, or I'm halfway through that, or whatever. When the Camelback's in the pouch in your rucksack, you don't look at it again until that evening when you actually get into camp and realize that actually you've carried another 1.5 kilos of water all the way up with you for the day because you haven't actually drank it.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be carrying the extra weight, for no reason. And I think that is a really good point. If you're not used to using things like Camelbacks before, then it might take a bit of adjustment, because you're right, you don't have a physical representation of how much water. It's harder to gauge it. So I would say if that is like something that people want to go for, as you're getting out into the hills, you're going for hikes and walks, try practicing with that. I usually go for a combination of both. So I'll have a liter and a half in my Camelback, and then I'll have a water bottle or 2 water bottles in my bag as well. And what I'll do is, as I'm hiking, I'll sip from a Camelback, but every time I stop for a break, I'm drinking from those water bottles. So for me, that's just something that I found is quite useful. I don't need to waste any time, to stop and get water out of my bag or anything. But then when we have stopped, I can kind of get a visual on what I'm drinking through those water bottles as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important as well when you think about rucksack selection for your day bag of how accessible you can get to your water. So in terms of, in my bag, I've got 2 pockets on mesh pockets in the side, and I can kind of reach around and pull my bottle out of that and put my bottle in, or ask somebody else to get the bottle out for you when you come to the stop. Obviously, a lot of day packs have got a separate pouch down the back of the day pack for a camelback to go with a hole for the pipe to come out. So thinking about how you're going to carry the water is super important.
Yeah, one thing I would suggest as well, and that's just from experience using these camelbacks, is if you can find one with a cap, that's quite useful, because especially in countries like Nepal where it gets really dusty, you don't really want to be, they will attract all of that dust, and all the dust will stick onto the nozzle. So, and it's the same for your water bottles as well. It was something, the water to go ones are quite good, and the Nalgene's are quite good. I had a Life Systems one, which also filters water, which is great. But in those dusty environments, the nozzle that you drink from can definitely get a lot of dust and dirt building up on it. So you want to clean that before you have a sip.
And on all of our kit lists, we advise people to, if they're taking a camelback, to take a water bottle with them as well. Because I think, if something happens to your camelback, if it breaks, if it, the nozzle comes loose, if the pipe comes off, or, anything can happen. Like, you're then not going to be like, it's very difficult to break an Nalgene bottle. Like it's
incredibly difficult to break an Nalgene bottle. I would always recommend having 2 options at least. And just having enough to carry all the water that you need. Looking at, okay, do I need a 2 litre or a 3 litre camelback? What water bottles am I after? In Nepal, it's slightly different, because you can, if you do buy water and all your water bottles break, hypothetically, you've had a bit of a nightmare with it, then they do sell bottles of water. But in Tanzania, plastic is prohibited on the mountain, so you're going to need the ability to store all of that water for yourself, because they're not going to be able to replace it with a bottle.
And I think we can't go into every trek that we offer, but like you say, if you go to Nepal, you can buy bottled water at all of the tea houses. You can also buy, for a lot cheaper, boiled water at the tea houses. But the bottled water gets a lot more expensive as you are going up the hill, because it has to be carried the same way you're trekking. So on any of the Nepal treks, if you are going to consider buying water every day, it does become quite expensive by the time you get to the top. Yeah,
definitely. It all adds up. So that is definitely something to take into account.
And that's the other great thing about a water to go bottle, which is a filtration bottle, which filters the water as you go. If you have a Nalgene bottle, like on the Everest Base Camp Trail, for example, you can fill your bottle up at any point. There is always somewhere to fill your bottle up, whether that is from a tea house, from a stream, or from one of the taps that they've put on the stop points on the way up. So you're never having to carry that 2-3 litres of water with you. You could literally carry 750 ml, and when you've drank it, you could then top it up again. So you're not having to carry that extra 2 kilos worth of water with you at the start of the day from when you're buying bottled water.
Doing a little bit of research into the trip that you're going to be going on is really important, because and actually just chatting to your leader when you're there, because you don't need to always load up with 5 litres and be super super laden down with it all. You can travel quite light and just keep filling it up as you go, and that's going to make a big difference on your recovery time over the next few days. And especially as you get higher, just specifically altitude, especially as you get higher, every kilogram starts feeling much heavier the higher you get.
So on Kilimanjaro, there is no option for bottled water. That's all going to be either, the guides are going to either filter it for you or they're going to boil it for you. Yeah. And just on a quick one then, if you have got an Nalgene bottle on an Everest base camp trek, you can buy boiled water that's hot. So what I advise anyone that feels cold, what I advise people to do is to, in the evening, go and get your Nalgene bottle filled up with boiled water and then use it as a hot water bottle then in your sleeping bag for the night. And then the following morning, it'll have cooled down and then you've got your day's drinking water that way then.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've used that before. It's and definitely recommended it to people. It's Nalgene's a great bit of kit.
And then so going back to Kili, then there is no bottled water on Kili. You might get some bottled water before you leave your hotel, but as soon as you get to the gate to start one of your treks, like you say, there is no plastic on Kilimanjaro, so it will come from either being filtered by the guides or boiled by your guides. I mean, our guys filter it, and even then, on some of the treks, as you get towards the higher camps, there is no water availability, so they are filtering it, and your porters are actually carrying all your water up for you at that point. I think I would certainly recommend a filtered water to go bottle for Kili. And obviously the other thing with Kili is, and with camelbacks, people take them on summit night, and actually, unless you've got an insulated tube, that tube is going to freeze on summit night on a camelback. Yeah,
well, one of the best bits of advice I actually did hear for Kilimanjaro, because you're right, it's so cold, or it can be so cold on those summit nights that there's a high chance that those things are going to freeze. So a couple of top tips that I tend to tell to people as we're going up for Kili. First of all, have a couple of different options. So again, water bottle, camelback, things like that. That's just my preferred method. Your water bottles, if you tip them upside down, so hypothetically, if you've got an Nalgene bottle, if you store them in your backpack upside down, if they do freeze, water tends to freeze from the top down. So if you're storing them upside down, then it's going to last a lot longer, because you can just turn it back up when you're drinking from it, and it's not all going to get frozen and stop you from drinking it. Your camelback, you're going to want to once you've taken a drink, it's effectively blow the water that's still in the pipe back into the bag, because it will be the pipe where it freezes and causes a block. And actually, what a really cool little tip, and I will give him credit. It was Gareth. Gareth gave me this bit of information. He said if you can buy a couple of the 0.5 litre Nalgene bottles, they fit really nicely on the inside pocket of your big down jackets. And because that's going to be closer to your body, then rather than having it on the outside of your backpack or anything like that, carry 0.5 litre of water in one of those small Nalgene bottles on the inside pocket, and that'll stop it from freezing as you're going up.
Yeah, or you can get those like the soft squeezy flask ones now, like the pouch ones. They're really good for inside your pockets as well, and you can get those in like 300 ml in 0.5 litre ones, and that works in exactly the same way. Those are really good. So Mount Toubkal, again, you've got access to bottled water on a Mount Toubkal trek, but again, if you had a water to go bottle, you've got to think about two things, haven't you? It's about the cost, and also about the single-use plastic from, you've got 16 people on a trek that are all buying 2 lots of 2 litre water bottle, plastic water bottles a day. That's an awful lot of single-use plastic. So to try and avoid that, the water to go bottles are, and I will put a link in the show notes for this. We have got a code for water to go bottles where you do get 15% off if you buy with the code. So do have a look at the water to go bottles, and I think the filters last like 200 litres. I think the filters last for on a water to go bottle, so they're definitely going to see you out on a trip.
Oh, yeah, I think there's some that you can even get that are more than that. I mean, they're incredible how long they do last. One of the other things I would say then is on some of the trips like Mount Tukau or the Sahara, early on on your base camp trips and your Kilimanjaros and things like that is the heat. Obviously, I'll recommend 4 liters of water to people, at the start of the trip all the way through to the end, because even though it's colder towards the top, the air is drier, and that's going to be dehydrating you as you go. But especially in those hot countries, just preventing yourself from getting sunburnt. So really being on it with covering yourself up, lots of sun cream, buffs, moisturizer in the evenings and things like that. Because if you do get burnt, you're going to be drawing away those, all that water from where you need it to try and help you recover from your sunburn. So that can be one of the quicker ways to dehydrate yourself, is if you do catch the sun. So try to avoid that is going to help you stay hydrated as well.
Yeah, and you don't realize at altitude sometimes that you are getting sunburnt either. Like, it might not necessarily be super warm, but the higher you get, the sun has a lot more power in it to burn you than it does down at sea level where we normally are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just a higher concentration, if you like. So yeah, it's much easier to get burnt. I've had people who are naturally, quite tanned or olive skinned, and they go, no, I'll be all right. And I've just watched them peel after a couple of days. Like, it's scary how strong it can be.
And what about those people who just literally don't like drinking water?
Well, that's a really good point. And I've definitely had people on my trips that are like, well, 4 liters of water to them just sounds impossible, because they just wouldn't drink water really anyway. There's a couple of things that I would suggest then. Robinsons, I think it's Robinsons, they do the fruit juice. They do like a little capsule of like concentrated like cordial, if you like. Yeah. Don't really weigh much. It's like a couple of drops per liter, but things like that, you can make your own squash and things to help you, take on that liquid. Couple of, as well as your 4 liters of water, then just drinking that quantity of water is going to kind of flush you out, if you like. You're going to be washing away a lot. You're going to be sweating because you're going to be hiking wherever you are. You're going to be sweating. You're going to be using it up. So you do run a little bit of a risk of washing out your salts, your sugars, and kind of those important, minerals in your body. So what I tend to recommend to people is, as well as drinking that 4 liters, stick some electrolyte tablets in with them. After a particularly long day, or if you've been on one of our trips where you're going to be around in the water, have a Coca-Cola at the end of the day. That's going to help balance and top up your sugar levels, the electrolytes with your salt and your minerals. And also, if you have taken on anything bad, any bad bacteria or anything, a Coke every now and again can be quite good just to settle the stomach.
Yeah, definitely. If you have got a bad stomach, Coke is a good way of clearing that out. And like you say, the energy drinks, I mean, I always, on all of our kit lists, the rehydration sachets are on there, like Diorolite. Now, I know we put Diorolite on there for people if they've had dodgy bellies, etc. But actually, if you are dehydrated, that's what it is there for. So if you feel, actually, do you know what, I'm feeling really bad, I've got a headache, and even like in a lot of the Life Systems first aid kits now, they come with a double-ended green spoon. And that is to make up it's just adding a teaspoon or a spoonful of salt, and then at the other end you've got the sugar to add to water to basically give you the right ratios to then to rehydrate yourself as well. So I think and if you've got 2 options as well, if you've got a Camelback and you've got an Nalgene bottle, or you've got a Nalgene bottle and you've got a water to go bottle, for example, you could have energy drink or an energy tablet in one, and then just pure water in the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on these trips, you're there for a purpose. There's something that you're trying to achieve. You're getting to see these amazing countries and take it all in. But with some of them, there's like an underlying goal, whether it's getting to the top of Kilimanjaro or seeing Everest Base Camp or crossing the Sahara. So I think, a lot of people sometimes worry about the diarrhea sachets, or they get it into their heads that, well, I've got a big headache and I'm feeling really rough, but I haven't got a dodgy belly, so I'm not going to take something like that because that's not what it's needed for. These trips are probably not always how you would live your life. It's not saying that you do it daily, but actually in those moments, it's like smashing one of those sachets, taking some ibuprofen and paracetamol if you do start getting headaches and things. I'm terrible for it. When I'm back home, I tend to not really take anything like that. I'm pretty bad. But on trips, any sorts of headaches, I'm straight on it, because it's not forever, and you want to give yourself the best chance possible of success.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, obviously, as well, not that we really want to discuss this on a podcast, but there is the straw pee test color. Like, you do need to be peeing clear of an evening. If you go to the toilet when you get into camp in the evening and you're, it's not clear as it's coming out, then you have not drunk enough water during the day and you need to do something about it.
Yeah, I tend to say to people, if it's crystal clear, then you're lacking your salts and your minerals, and you need to smash an electrolyte or something like that. It might depend on the clientele, but I usually say the color of champagne is your sweet spot. So, that's what I tend to say to people. That's what you're after.
If you've got anything on the other, if you've got a Dulux color chart with you, do you take that at the moment?
I do. That's that's exactly what I've got. It's got the Bristol scale next to it as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've pretty much covered that off, and hopefully there's some information in there for everyone that kind of they can take away and think about how they're going to prepare for their trek. But obviously, if you have got any questions specific to the trek you're doing, then please do email in, and we can help with specifics. But like I said, we couldn't discuss every trip on the podcast in how you'll get water, etc. But obviously we have discussed Tanzania, we have discussed Morocco, we have discussed Nepal. So if you're trekking in one of those countries, then it's going to be very similar in terms of, obviously there aren't any shops to buy bottled water in the Sahara as there are on the Mount Toubkal trek, but that's probably the only difference there. Well, Jake, thanks ever so much for coming on again and chatting through that. We hope that's been really useful for you, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks very much. Cheers, Jake.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the BucketLister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.